Hey everybody. So for today's movie review, I'm going to talk about the film Tales from the Darkside, the movie. It is a film adaptation of a TV show called Tales from the Darkside by George A. Romero. And kind of like the film Creepshow, for those who've seen that, it's basically a film of horror anthology stories. So they've taken, like, I think for this film they took four of them, four horror stories, and they blended it into one movie. And the Creepshow films did this too, where they would always have something to kind of wrap around all these stories to kind of make them all work for this one film. So like for the first Creepshow, for example, you'd see like this opening skit, with this dad telling his kid that he just wanted him reading these horror comic books. And throughout each of the stories, it'd either be like a comic book transition or something dealing with that dad or that kid again. And for this film, um, basically, this woman is grocery shopping at the beginning, and when she comes back to her house, she has this kid locked up in her kitchen. And he's kind of like in this dungeon-looking room that's locked, and only she has the key to get him out of this room. And for some odd reason, she has this book inside this dungeon room with him. And I guess while she was out grocery shopping, this kid was looking at all these stories in this book, and it was called Tales from the Dark Side. So I guess from what you see at the beginning of the film, this woman is trying. Basically, you find out she's kind of like this cannibal, where she's going to eat this kid, and so she has all this stuff going. She has all these veggies going. It's kind of like this chicken pot pie looking meal going on, and so throughout the story, this kid's always trying to distract her while he can find something to get out of this dungeon looking room so he can escape. Um, so basically, you get three stories. Yeah, I'd say about three stories in between. Yeah, there was three stories in between all of this, what they called the wraparound story in this. And I looked it up online. They called it the wraparound, where they had the kid at the beginning and the woman and the woman at the end of the movie too, kind of wrapping everything up. And there was segments in between these stories that dealt with that woman and that kid too. Um, so basically, there was a story in here where, and this one actually had the most celebrities in it, where this college student gets this mummy box and reads like this description that came with it, and that was like in hieroglyphics. And the mummy came back to life and started killing everybody. So it's kind of like if you've seen Creepshow 2, it's kind of like the wooden Indian chief story. It kind of reminded me of that. There was a second story dealing with a detective that's hired to kill this black cat in this man's house, who this old man has claimed to have killed everybody who's ever lived in this mansion with him. And this detective is hired to kill the cat once and for all, since this man himself and all the other people he's hired cannot kill this cat in this house. Um, then there was a third story dealing with um, this gargoyle that lived above kind of like a New York City apartment, and he was this gargoyle creature is always watching over this artist who's always trying to sell his work through freelancing. And one night while he's meeting up with some people at a bar, he encounters the gargoyle, and the gargoyle kills actually the people that he was with that night at the bar. And the gargoyle claims to have let him go if he swears to never tell anybody um, about the gargoyle, about what happened, why he has this huge scratch mark across his chest that came from the gargoyle. Um, so basically, if the man never tells anybody about this gargoyle who just killed off his friend, you can tell people that the friend got killed off. Obviously, they're going to find out eventually, but he can never speak of the gargoyle again. He has this relationship with this woman shortly after all this happens, and he kind of suffers from his own promise from this gargoyle later on in the story, and that's about as much as I want to tell without giving it away. But basically, the theme of that story, the one with the gargoyle, was to always keep your promises, because they will bite you in the back if you don't keep them. And like I explained before, the wraparound kind of concludes the film after that story. But I really like Tales of the Dark Side from the Dark Side, you guys. It was really well done, though not as good as, like, let's say the first Creepshow film. It was a very well done film nonetheless. I would actually go so far as to say I liked it better than Creepshow 2 and VHS. VHS was a more recent horror anthology story, but it's way better than both of those two. But like I said, it's not quite the level of the first Creepshow film. So for the positives, you guys, the horror anthology setup in this film was very good. They definitely had the whole Creepshow setup in the sense that something to wrap everything around with the stories in between it. I like how they established that right away. Um, this film actually had a more darker and more serious tone than the Creepshow films. The Creepshow films had more kind of camp values to them. This was definitely a more darker toned horror anthology. So for those who were hoping for a more darker toned horror anthology, you might like this film better than the Creepshow films. Um, let's see what I have here. I really like the cat story that I was explaining earlier. Really well done. I actually think that Stephen King was the writer of that story because I think Stephen King, George A. Romero, Michael McDowell from Beetlejuice, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote Sherlock Holmes, all of them were involved with this film. For the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle portion, though, it was basically a story he wrote back when he was alive, and one of the writers of this film basically took his story and made it work within Tales from the Darkside. They found a way to make it work. It wasn't a Sherlock Holmes story; it was something else that he wrote. Um, the like I explained before, I liked the wraparound in this film. It was very well done. Definitely kept you on the edge of your seat, kind of always curious as to how it's going to end and how it's going to wrap up. Um, yeah, I really enjoyed the wraparound they had for this story. The gargoyle story was good too. I thought it was a very unique approach of romance and like I was explaining before, kind of keeping your promises and that they really mean things to other people when you promise things. Um, yeah, very interesting story. I definitely didn't see it. Well, I kind of predicted some things about it, but for the most part, it was there. It was just a very entertaining story to watch. There was a few predictable things about it. There were just a few though. Um, I liked the creep show similarities and homages in this film. Definitely a lot of things similar to the first creep show films in here. A lot of homages. Like I explained before, like the Indian chief story from Creepshow 2 is definitely very much referenced in the mummy story in this near the beginning. I think Steve Buscemi, Julianne Moore, and Christian Slater were all in the mummy story. So it was kind of neat to see all those celebrities I've seen in tons of other movies a part of this film. Um, like I was explaining before, I did like this film a lot better than Creepshow 2 and VHS. Um, just a lot more fun than those two movies. Just overall better stories were used for this film. And like I explained before, the wraparound I felt was much better than it was in Creepshow 2. And actually VHS did have a crossover, a kind of a, universal wraparound story also. But it just wasn't as good as the one they had in this film here. Um, for negatives, you guys, I did think there was some unrealistic human behavior throughout the movie. Just a lot of things in here, just like, nobody would ever think that way or ever pursue something that way. The mummy story, for certain, had a lot of that kind of moments. Even the one with the cat had a lot of those kind of moments too. And even the one with the gargoyle kind of had that every once in a while too. Didn't hurt the film too much, but I think it was a flaw of the film that they found a way to make it more realistic human behavior within these characters you see throughout the film. Um, the film is very unrelatable at times. There's just a lot of scenes in here where it's just like, I would never, I don't know of anybody or even myself that would, think that way on that certain thing. Um, the first Creepshow film and even the second one had horror comic book effects throughout the movie, like specifically during the transitions between the stories. I would have liked this film to have had something like that too. This film very much told it like it was. Didn't really have any like a horror comic book effect because the Tales from the Dark Side book was kind of more of a encyclopedia looking book at the beginning of the movie. Maybe have the kid open the page and maybe have an effect with the page turning on the screen or something. I think something like that, something that small, I think would have already improved the film by a lot. Basically, it was just one of those things. Oh yeah, I have this other story to tell. Boom, the story would start. that's fine, but have a little bit more fun with your movie. Don't just start the story. Have a good transition into that story somehow. Um, Not as good as the first Creepshow film. It just wasn't as fun. It was a fun movie, but it wasn't as fun as the first Creepshow. So don't scare you. I don't want to scare you away by saying that, but just be warned though, when you're watching this film, don't expect the next original Creepshow. I really didn't think it was that powerful. Um, the Mummy story, I just had a ton of flaws with, like I was explaining. Basically, all the negatives I just said apply to the Mummy story at the beginning. With the unrealistic human behavior, the unrelatable moments, um, the no horror comic book effect kind of thing. There was transitions specifically throughout that one. Um, but yeah, like I said, I would have liked to see like a horror comic book or like kind of like an Elvira late at night show feeling to the movie. I think something like that would have been more effective. Um, the film is very laughable at times. Not to give anything away with the cat story, but there was a moment in the film where it's like, there's no black cat or even a cat on a face of the earth that could do that. Uh, what the abilities that the cat had in that story was very unbelievable, very laughable. When you see it, you'll know what I mean. There's just no way a cat could ever possibly do that. And though it is fiction, don't basically the best stories ever told are the ones where um, you can connect with it. You can almost watch the film or the story or read it and basically feel, what, that kind of thing could happen to someone or something. So basically, I know this was fiction, but I think maybe just add a little bit more realism to it, because the cat story specifically near the end, just had a lot of really unrealistic moments. I like the story, but like I said, there was just some unrealistic moments throughout that story. Um, the Mummy story also relied on star power a lot. We had Steve Buscemi, Julianne Moore, and Christian Slater all for that. Then when we get to the second and third story, we have a lot of celebrities or that we don't even recognize. I don't know this actor by name, but for those who've seen Mortal Kombat Annihilation, the second Mortal Kombat film, um, the actor who played Raiden in that was the artist in the Gargoyle story. But for the most part, guys, I did enjoy Tales from the Dark Side. It was a fun movie. I liked it a lot better than Creepshow 2 in VHS. I give it an 8.5 out of 10. I liked this one, but at the same time, don't go in expecting the next original Creepshow. But if you like horror anthology stories, Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, is definitely worth checking out.